Like, that is exactly how they pitched that movie to somebody. You know, somebody went into a studio, the executives went like, okay, what's this movie about? And they just went like, odd couple, wacky trip, go together in time for birth. Hello, ladies, gents, and non-binary mates, and welcome back to Beauty in the Bookcase. So growing up in Puerto Rico, most of the times, especially when I was younger and I went to the movies, we got both the English version, a Spanish dub version, and there was just an English version with Spanish subtitles. And I always read along, even though I understood English, but what always struck me was that the translations of movie titles were always the weirdest thing. Like, you could have a very normal phrase like The Hangover, and the translation would not just be La Resaca, it would be like Las Aventuras de los Chicos Cool. I don't remember what the actual translation was, but it was always something ridiculous. And it always made me wonder what was going on in these translators' heads, because for those of you who don't know, I did do my master's in translation studies, and we had a class on subtitles, and we were talking about how sometimes, you know, subtitles change for different reasons. Sometimes it's because you gotta fit a certain format, and sometimes it's just because the script the translator gets isn't necessarily what ends up actually being spoken, so you're not always working with the actual film or TV show, you're just working from a script and then translating from that. Why they do that, I don't know. So today I found a few lists online with the worst translated movie titles. So let's get started. I will clarify that not all of these titles were just the Spanish titles, so I'm technically going to be reading an English translation of the translated title. So we're actually starting off with Eternal Sunshine of the Spotless Mind. So it seems that because the title might seem perhaps a bit obscure, you know, maybe it doesn't make as much sense, or maybe when you do translate it into the target language, it might be misinterpreted or might have a different meaning. So for some reason, Eternal Sunshine of the Spotless Mind in Italian became If You Leave Me, I Delete You, which isn't inaccurate. So it seems this German translator thought airplane was a bit too vague for a title, so they wanted to spice things up by renaming this The Unbelievable Trip in a Wacky Airplane, which I don't know what this movie's about, but it almost feels cartoonish. And on that same vein, you know, the whole idea of maybe you're just over-explaining in these titles, the Seth Rogen comedy Knocked Up became One Night Big Belly in Chinese. Which, I mean, in that case, I can kind of see how the translation wouldn't have necessarily worked directly, just because, you know, knocked up doesn't necessarily mean the same thing when, you know, in its Chinese counterpart. However, I feel like there has to be a different expression, right? There has to be some type of way to express this that isn't so much like, here's the plot, they had a one-night stand, and now they're pregnant. And it seems that an emerging trend that I have seen in these Chinese titles is that they do tend to go very literal, and at the same time that might just be a cultural thing, right? So when it comes to marketing, you always have to keep in mind that obviously you have a target audience, and what works for an English-speaking audience might not work for a different audience. And from what I'm starting to see here is that when it comes to Chinese titles, they do tend to be quite literal. So I think something that is interesting is that perhaps Chinese films don't tend to really go for, you know, metaphors or imagery in their title, but they like to be a little bit more direct. So for example, The Sixth Sense just became He's a Ghost, which technically isn't exactly right. I mean, full disclosure, I've never seen The Sixth Sense. I haven't seen a lot of movies, but tis my understanding that he's more like a medium, like he can see ghosts, but he isn't a ghost. Like the child is alive, is what I'm trying to say. Alright, so just as I keep trying to be like, oh wait, I think I figured out what, like, the tactic is with these Chinese translations, something happens and I'm like, never mind, I don't understand. Because apparently The film Fargo in Chinese became Mysterious Murder in Snowy Cream. This one almost feels like they were just given the movie poster and were told, here, just translate this movie poster. Because, like, if I was if I was looking at this picture, right, if that's all I had to go off, if I didn't have a script, if I hadn't seen a trailer, if I didn't have a general idea of the plot, that's what I have, right? I'm like, somebody's dead, there's a car rolled over, and there's some snow on the ground. So, Mysterious Murder in Snowy Cream. Now, I think another thing that we also need to consider when we're looking at translations is that there are a lot of different cultural boundaries, right? So what's acceptable in one culture isn't necessarily, like, acceptable in another. And I think this is something that we can often see with things like references to politics or sex. You know, any type of taboo topic is going to be treated differently by different people. So an interesting example of this is actually with the movie Austin Powers, The Spy Who Shagged Me, which in Malaysia actually became Austin Powers, The Spy Who Behaved Very Nicely Around Me, which I think is quite, it's funny, like we laugh at it because we're like, wow, how ridiculous, but it is important to sort of keep in mind that, you know, with every culture, there are certain expectations and there are certain things that aren't necessarily acceptable. So if you live in a very conservative type of culture, you know, speaking so bluntly about sex, you know, putting it right there in the movie title isn't necessarily something that's going to be acceptable, and it's not going to be marketable, right? Because whereas for a specific market, it might just kind of be like, okay, this is just like raunchy humor and it's completely normal. For other markets, it might just seem inappropriate, or it might even mislead people to what it's about. You know, if you live in a country where only adult films have very raunchy titles, then you might not want to take your partner or your kids or go with your friends to see a movie with a title that is quite explicit to an extent. And speaking of kind of considering culture, you know, another thing that's kind of very prevalent in the field of translation is when you translate, do you want to adapt to the target culture or do you want to keep it to the original culture? So for example, we see this in books, right? So the Russians, for example, a lot of those books have a lot of footnotes because they do try to be as authentic to that idea. You know, they're not trying to sell you this story in your culture. They're trying to get your mind to sort of go to Russia and be in that moment. So we do have instances where we kind of laugh because like, oh, that's like ridiculous, but you do want your audience to connect. So for example, Cloudy with a Chance of Meatballs in Israel actually became It's Raining Falafel, which, I mean, it works because I guess, you know, the shape of meatballs does kind of resemble falafel, but it's also going to resonate more with your audience, which is going to make them want to go watch the film, right? Because if I live in a country where meatballs just aren't a thing or they're not very common, then I'm not going to be able to see myself and resonate and find an interest in that. And sure, like, it's a kid's movie, it's ridiculous and all, but it still works. If you give your audience something that they can kind of connect with, even on a very surface level, they're going to kind of want to, you know, take the bait and go actually invest in it because they are feeling a little bit more represented. And I guess kind of like an opposite, going back to when we were talking about like how sex, for example, as a topic is treated in different cultures, whereas in Malaysia it seems to be a little bit more taboo and a bit more kind of like, yeah, you can't be that literal because people are not going to feel comfortable watching that. Apparently, the French feel quite the opposite, as the film No Strings Attached is actually just titled Sex Friends. So it does seem that they do take a little bit more of a literal approach, and that just might be because that type of phrase, like the literal phrase, doesn't work in the same way, and they might not have something similar, so then they kind of reach for the closest thing they can find. So this one kind of threw me for a loop, because for the most part, you know, the things that we've been seeing have been an attempt to kind of, I guess, make things relatable or simplify them or even make them more palatable. But the Danish clearly have an interesting approach to these things, because Charlie and the Chocolate Factory in Danish was actually the boy who drowned in chocolate sauce. Which, like, yes, but that's not the major plot point. I think it's just so, I think it is maybe shock value is a bit more prevalent in how they title that. So obviously if you kind of did it as like the boy who won a chocolate factory, whatever, why would I want to see that? However, the boy who drowned in chocolate sauce, that's going to get your attention. So I think it would be really interesting just to kind of find out why the Danish just went so dark, but also, you know, almost unrelated to really the major central point of the film. And now, okay, so here we go. I was talking about how Latin American titles are always just absurd. So apparently, for you Batman fans out there, The Dark Knight in Spanish was just, well, okay, I will say that this translation isn't exactly, like, it doesn't have to be as literal, because they did translate it as the Knight of the Night, but El Caballero de la Noche can also mean, like, the Gentleman of the Night. I just realized that means something. I'm pretty sure there is an adult film called The Gentleman of the Night that has nothing to do with Batman, and we're gonna leave it at that. I see why they made that choice. And then, okay, so it does seem kind of, so here again we have with Germany another example where maybe we were just being a little bit too literal, and maybe all you got was a freaking poster to base your translation off of, because dodgeball, which I get that dodgeball as a concept might not necessarily exist outside of America. Don't quote me on that. I have no idea. Germans, if there are any Germans watching, let me know how absolutely incorrect I probably am. But I don't know, like, I feel like you could have just replaced it with a different sport or something, but instead the German title is straight in the nuts, which I just feel like when I see that, I'm just like, that just looks like genuinely somebody just gave you this poster and went like, based off of this, translate it. And then they went like, okay, here goes nothing. Now, what's been interesting is that for the most part, a lot of what we've seen have been more so literal translations, because perhaps in the target language, the expression doesn't exist. However, in the case of Jaws in French, we actually end up with a metaphor instead of a more literal title, with Jaws literally being retitled as The Teeth from the Sea, which is such an odd I get it. I understand what they're going for. However, it's, I don't, you know what I mean? Like, why? Okay, now here's one. This is exactly why the Spanish titles of movies get made fun of, because why? So, if y'all ever saw The Pacifier with Vin Diesel, like, it's supposed to be like, oh, it's a play on words, the pacifier, kind of like his, you know, like babies and their binkies, and but it's also like he kind of calms down situations. But for some weird reason, I don't know if maybe it could very well just be kind of like a Spain Spanish type of thing where I'm just not getting something, but for some weird reason, they've translated the pacifier as un canguro super duro, so basically like a very strong kangaroo. Like, I don't know, do you call like nannies maybe? Again, I don't know why these Spanish titles always have to be that much longer than the original. Like, for example, here we have Weekend at Bernie's became this dead guy is very much alive, or Weekend with the Dead Guy, which at least Weekend with the Dead Guy is a little bit more succinct, but this dead guy is very much alive. Like, why? Why are we adding so many extra words that we don't need? Like, why is the translation of this not just fin de semana con Bernie? I think this is actually my favorite one, also a Chinese translation, Free Willy, which I loved when I was a kid, is apparently a very powerful whale runs to heaven, which is hilarious. Runs to heaven is such a weird way to express that thought. But again, you know, we do need to consider that I am just reading the English translations of these translations, and I obviously don't have the context, the cultural context, to be able to tell you why that is. Okay, I think the French are over here trying to take Spain's title for wordiest title translation, because The Matrix is the young people who traverse dimensions while wearing sunglasses, which I find hilarious that they felt the need to include that they wear sunglasses. Like, this very much could have been cut off at the young people who traverse dimensions. Why did we need to explain that they wear sunglasses while they do it? Why is Army of Darkness in Japan Captain Supermarket? I've never heard of that movie. I don't know what it's about. But why is it Captain Supermarket? Japan, are you okay? And here we go with another great Chinese entry. Leon the Professional, titled as This Hitman is Not as Cold as He Thought. Which is, again, it's like, why are we trying to explain an entire plot in the title? Like, yes, your title should be somewhat representative, but I don't need a synopsis. Just... And again, in this case, you know, when it's just kind of something that isn't necessarily, you know, it's not like an expression, you know, it's not something culturally specific where you wouldn't necessarily understand. So why? And why are we adding so many words to titles? Japan, what is with these translations? Girl Interrupted. 17-year-old girl's medical chart. I feel like, you know, with some of the previous examples we've seen, you know, it was kind of like, okay, I get it. Like, you're kind of just looking for the most interesting point just to get your viewer's attention and get him to come see it, right? Like, 17-year-old girl's medical chart is not interesting. I don't understand why anybody would be drawn to that. You know what I mean? Granted, it's a little bit better than Germany's attempt, which was just cuckoo. It sometimes does make me wonder, like, did you actually give this to a person? Or did you just feed it through a machine? Did you just, like, look through a list of synonyms until you found one you liked? Did you just tell a native speaker to just start shouting random words from a specific category at you and then just waited until something sounded nice? Like, I don't... Explain this. Explain this to me. Yeah, another translation just giving away the entire plot in the title. Because in Thailand, Due Date, with Robert Downey Jr. and Zach Galifianakis, literally the Thai title of Due Date is Odd Couple, Wacky Trip, Go Together in Time for Birth. That's it. That's the plot. Like, that is exactly how they pitched that movie to somebody. You know, somebody went into a studio, the executives went like, okay, what's this movie about? And they just went like, Odd Couple, Wacky Trip, Go Together in Time for Birth. Like, this is someone's elevator pitch, but as the title. Oh. I'm just gonna put that one there and just not read it out loud, because I don't know that YouTube would like that, but Japan. I think I found the meanest one. Never Been Kissed, you know, Drew Barrymore. The Philippines was just savage and just, instead of Never Been Kissed, they wanted to give us a reason as to why she's never been kissed. And the answer to that was, because she's ugly. China, I don't understand your choices either. Pretty Woman in China became I will marry a sex worker to save money. Okay, here we go. One of the weird Spanish ones. Die Hard, which I guess already doesn't make that much sense to me in English anyway, but in Spanish it was translated as La Jungla de Cristal, the glass jungle. Why? I don't know. Is there a glass jungle in there? I don't know. I've never seen Die Hard, but why? I love that Jerry Maguire was translated basically with the title that a soap opera would have. Jerry Maguire is amor y desafío, love and struggle. I don't know that struggle is really desafío. Desafío is more like a challenge, but anyway, just very cheesy telenovela kind of title. Okay, here's one I do agree with. Horrible Bosses was translated as Quiero matar a mi jefe. I want to kill my boss. Yeah. I've seen that film. It makes sense. I guess at least in that one I can be like, I mean, it's kind of the plot. It's the sentiment of the thing. Well, here's one of the Hangover ones, which is called ¿Qué pasó ayer? What happened yesterday? I feel like that one makes sense, though. I feel like that wasn't the one that we had necessarily in Latin America, because I remember it being something really ridiculous that didn't even make sense. Okay, everyone knows The Sound of Music. Classic. Julie Andrews is in it. We love it. Whatever. But the Spanish translations, two of them, were La Novicia Rebelde, so like the rebellious novice, which, yes, but also kind of not the point. I mean, I guess it is partially the point of the plot, but I feel like there's more important things you would want to highlight about what that movie's about. Or Sonrisas y Lágrimas, Smiles and Tears. I guess that one's a bit more accurate. Like, you'll have a fun time, and then it's gonna get real dark real quick. What? Okay, I've hadn't heard of this movie, which is a very long title. Doctor Strangelove, or How I Learned to Stop Worrying and Love the Bomb, which was translated to Teléfono Rojo, Volamos hacia Moscú. Red Telephone, Let's Fly to Moscow. I feel like that one's potentially one of those more literal ones, you know? Where I'm just looking at the poster and I'm like, did you literally just get a poster for this and go with it? Like, what? Oh yeah, Nightmare Before Christmas. Nightmare Before Christmas is, in Spanish, is El Extraño Mundo de Jack, so Jack's Strange World. Which makes sense. I don't know why you couldn't have just translated that as La Pesadilla antes de... I don't know, maybe because this is, you know, a kid's film, I guess El Extraño Mundo de Jack is a bit more... like, it would appeal more to children. I think if, you know, you begged your mom to let you go watch The Nightmare Before Christmas, she'd probably be like, that sounds like a horror movie and not appropriate. But Jack's Strange World, she might let you go. What? I feel like, okay, 101 Dalmatians is here. I strictly remember watching that in Spanish and just having it be Lo siento un dálmatas, which is literally just the Spanish for 101 Dalmatians. This one says La Noche de las Narices Frías, the Night of Cold Noses. I've never heard of that. Maybe it was not the translation that we got in my country. But I don't know. I feel like I would need somebody to fact check that for me because I've never heard that before. I love that another classic film, Some Like It Hot, Marilyn Monroe, became Con faldas y a lo loco. So wearing skirts and going wild. It's like... I mean, yes, but also... I don't know. I feel like in that case, I do understand that you would need something a little bit more... just something that would connect to your audience a little better. Because I, honestly, looking at it, I don't know how I would translate Some Like It Hot to Spanish. So, I would love to know in the comments which one of these titles was the weirdest for you, which one you found the funniest, and if you've had any titles in your own language that have left you going like, but why? Make sure you leave them down in the comments below. As always, thank you so much for watching. Make sure you hit that like button to let me know you enjoyed this video, and subscribe for more videos like this. And as always, hit that notification bell so you know exactly when I upload next, and I'll see you guys next time.